In this presentation, we will continue on with our fairly comprehensive problem. Last time, we left off on number 8. Now we're going to be moving on to number 9, where we have the expense allocated to program services and support services. So in essence, we're going to go through the program and support services. We're going to allocate our expense in accordance with these percentages. We will then use this allocation to create our statement of activities, the income type statement account. So once again, we have the public health education. We're going to take our expenses and apply 40%, community services 20%, management and general 20%, and fundraising 20%. So if we scroll over then to our worksheet, now we're going to be up top. So I'm going to scroll all the way up top, make sure that you're at the top worksheet, and we're going to scroll down then to row 17. So within row 17, this is where our allocation is going to take place. We, in essence, just made a table now that's going to allocate all the expenses. You'll see that this is going to line up right to where our expenses are at. Then we have our table here. Then we have our percentages, 40%, 20%, 20%, 20% for public health and education, community services, management and general, fundraising, and the total. So we're going to break this out, and then we're gonna show you what the journal entry would look like to break this out as well. So first, we're just gonna break out our expenses. So here's our expense amounts. We're just gonna break them out into our allocations. So we're in cell T18. I'm gonna say that this equals, and I'm gonna scroll over, and I'm gonna pick up the rent expense. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna be in cell U18, and I'm just gonna say equals. I'm gonna pull or click on that 35,800. Multiply it times 40%. So I just took the 35,800 times 40%. And then I'm going to do the same thing all the way down. So let's do it. Let's do a few more of these, and then I'll show you a quicker way to do this. We're going to say this equals, and we'll pick up the salaries expense. Same process. We're going to say this equals the salaries expense, the 226,260 times the 40%. So we're just taking that 226,260 times 40%. And then we'll do the same thing for the one, whatever is under the salaries expense, which is the telephone. So telephone is going to be equal to the 6200 times the 40%, and enter. And then the next item we're going to have under the telephone is going to be the printing and postage, which will be equal to, and we're going to pick up the 12,900 times the 40%. And then, of course, we're going to say this equals, and we'll pick up the utilities. Utilities is going to be equal to the utilities of 9,100 times the 40%. Next, we're going to pick up the supplies. The supplies is going to be equal to the 5,000 times the 40%. And then we're going to pick up, we're almost there. We've got two more, the provision for uncollectibles. And this is going to be equal to the 21,600 times 40%. And then we get one more, and then we have to stop this because this is the last one. So depreciation, and that's going to be equal to the 4,400 times the 40%. So there we have that. We do the same allocation. Now, how could we do that a little bit faster? Is it possible for us to do that faster? We could. If I delete this whole thing, this is just for practice. You don't have to actually delete it if you don't want to, but it will be much faster if you do it this way. We're going to delete this. And then the first one, I already have this one. We can use the autofill function. So we might as well just autofill. We're going to autofill down. We're just going to pick up those same expense accounts. And there we have it. That's a little bit faster. Could we do that over here? We could try. If I do it. Oh, that doesn't look good. We got this funny value thing. What happened if I double click on it? This one moved down as we think it should. This one needs to stick at the 40% though. And it didn't. It like moved down. So what we need to do is double click on this one. And you could use a mixed reference. I just used an absolute reference. And one easy way to do that is just to hit F4, put your cursor in U16, somewhere within U16, and hit F4. It'll put a $ before the U, a $ before the 16. Has nothing to do with dollar signs. It just means, hey, Excel, don't move the cell down when we use the autofill. So if I autofill down now, if I copy and paste the cell, the formula, then double click on it, did it do what we want? Yeah, it moved it down, picked up the right number. So we have to use that absolute reference or a mixed reference if you want, and then drag this down. And there we have it. So that's a bit easier to do. Now we can do the same thing for the 20%. So we're going to do the same thing over here. We're going to say this equals the 35,800 times the 20%. And again, we could do this all the way down, or we could do the same thing. We can double click on it, absolute reference the second value by saying F4 like that, and enter. And then we can autofill it down. We autofill down like so, like so. All right, and then we're going to do this again for the next one. We're going to say this equals the 35,800 times 20% once again. And then once again, that second one, I'm gonna absolute reference F4 $W $16 and enter, and then we'll autofill that one down. So autofill that down, and one more time, and then we have to stop this project. So we're going to say this plus or times, not plus, times the 20%. One more time, double clicking on it. Something, we're going to go to the F4 absolute reference. Then I'm going to autofill it down. All right. So now we just have to add the totals. So now we got the total. This is just going to be the total. And I'm going to sum this up. Our good old sum function equals the sum of these items, this whole row. So our most common function, the sum function. We could do that all the way across, or we can use the autofill function, which I'll do. I'm just going to autofill all the way across, all the way to the total, even though I haven't totaled the other way yet. So there we have that, and now we'll total this way by saying equals the sum of these cells. Now, as you do this, you might say, why is this column so long? I don't make it shorter because we're going to use it later when we do the financial statements, or you can make it shorter, but you'll have to make it longer again when we do the financials. So we're going to hit that one, and then we're going to autofill that down. And there we have that. Now, notice this number, you could autofill this way or this way. I like this total to be the total of the vertical column as opposed to the total here, but you want to be able to double check. It should be the same number either way you total it. Now we're going to use this information to break out our journal entry. We're going to make a journal entry to break out this information into these account categories. So into public health, education, community services, management, and fundraising in accordance with these amounts. To do this, however, I'm going to I've copied this whole thing down. You don't have to copy it. I'm just going to scroll down. You'll note we're going to move down to this next one down here. So we're going to be down here in 033. Where do the balances from 033 come from? These balances are coming from the cells up top. So they're coming from up here. So these ending balances are now the beginning balances down here. Why do I do this? Because I want to be able to see the trial balance. I want to show you and let you see the trial balance with the expenses, which is more familiar to what we would see in a for-profit organization. Then move down here and reallocate these expenses to these categories that we have just set up here. Now adding these accounts: public health and education, community services, management funds, fundraising. So in essence, what are we doing? We are going to zero out these, allocate them up to these categories in accordance with these percentages that we just set up here, in accordance with this table. So let's see what that will look like. It's going to be a fairly long journal entry, but hopefully it'll be kind of straightforward type of transaction. This, of course, is something that is different for the not-for-profit than a for-profit type of organization. So I'm going to scroll down. We're going to be down here in J35. Within J35, I'm going to say this is number 9, and we're going to pick up these accounts. We're going to say this is equal to, we'll pick up the public health and education. And then we're going to pick up the, what's below a public health, the community service program. And then we're going to pick up the management and general. And then we're going to pick up the fundraising. So there's going to be our items. And these are we're going to use the amounts that we just figured out in that table. So public health and education is going to be equal to, I'm going to scroll back up to this table, and there's a lot of scrolling here. But here's our public health and education, 40% of all the expenses. So 40% of every expense, we added it up. That's the 128,504. And then we're going to say that the next one is going to be community services equals. We're going to go and pick up the community services. So that's 20% of the expenses, the 64,252. And then we're going to pick up the management and general. And so that's going to be the 20% for management and general. And then finally we have the fundraising. So fundraising is going to be the other debit. And we're going to go to fundraising. And that's going to be the 64,252 as well. And now, in essence, we're going to close out all the expense accounts. This is kind of like in a closing entry because we just reallocated all the expense accounts in accordance with these categorizations and using those percentages. So now we can just go to the expenses down below. We're going to say this equals the rent expense. This equals the salaries expense. This equals the telephone expense. This equals the printing expense. And you might say there should be an easier way to do this. Can't we just copy and paste all the expenses down? We can do that. And I would do it even a little bit easier by using the autofill. So now that I've shown that, notice we could. I'm going to delete these just to do this easy in an easier format. I'm going to delete these. I'm going to keep the rent expense. And then I'm just going to have all the expenses are in a row under that. So I'm going to delete this, put our cursor on rent expense, and then we can just simply autofill down. And the last one that we have is the provision is depreciation. So one more. So there we have it. So now what we'll do is we'll go through the expenses and just remove the expenses. So to do this, I'm going to say negative of the beginning balance and all the expenses. So this is the rent. So this is going to be negative of this number. And then I'm going to post it to the middle column, and that'll just remove each of them. Now you cannot pick up this number because it'll create a circle reference when you try to post then to this cell. So we're going to say negative of this number, the beginning number, then post to this cell, which will bring it down to 0. So I'm going to say enter. And then we'll do the same thing for salaries. So salaries is going to be negative of the salaries, the first in column P. And then telephone is going to be negative of the telephone in column P. And then we've got the printing, it's going to be negative of, and then we'll pick up the printing in column P, and so on and so forth. Utilities, we're going to pick up the negative there again. And again, you might say, is there an easier way to do this? And there is. We can use the good old autofill once again. So I can delete these just to show the autofill. Delete these. These are all in a row. So we want to recognize every time we can do an autofill thing. We're going to say, okay, let's just do that first one and then autofill it down. And that should pick up everything we want. Does it? Let's check that last one. Make sure it's doing what we want. Looks good. Looks like that's depreciation and that's depreciation. Everything looks like it's tying together, which is nice. Okay, so that's going to be that activity. So now it should add up to 0 because it lines up to the table. So if I highlight the credits, that lines up, or that adds up to 321,260. The debits add up to 321,260. Debits equal the credits. We're good to go. So now we're going to post this out. We got the public education program. So we're going to go up top, public education program. That's in Q47 equals. And we'll pick up that 128,504. So that looks good. Next one is the community services. There it is here. Community services is down here. We're in cell Q48 equals, and we're going to pick up that 64,252. And then we're on the management and general. So management and general is down here. We are in cell Q49 equals, and we'll pick up that 64,252. Then we're in the fundraising. So fundraising is down here. Next one, we're in Q50 equals, scrolling up that 64,252. Then we want the rent expense. So here's the rent expense. We're going to scroll down to rent expense. So we are in cell Q53 equals, and then we'll scroll back up and pick up what's in Q, and that's 35,800. Next we have under rent expense, salaries expense. So salaries expense is going to be in cell Q54 equals, and then we'll pick up the salaries expense. Next we have, what do we have next? We've got the telephone expense. So we'll scroll down, that's telephone expense equals, and then we'll scroll back up and pick up the telephone expense. These are all going down to 0 as we can see. And that's what and then we're going to go to the next one, which is printing, I would assume. Printing. Scrolling down, we have the printing equals. Scrolling back up, and we will pick up the printing. And then we have the utilities. So here's the utilities, here's the utilities. So let's pick up the utilities. That's in Q57. So there is that one. And so you can see they're all going down to 0. Now, again, these are in order. So could we do this a little bit more quickly? They're all in order. We could do the autofill once again. So we've done the first one. So if I delete these, we could just simply use the autofill, and it should pick up the appropriate cells. Let's see if that is indeed the case. Let's autofill this down. Auto drives it down. Dr. Phil does the calculations. Autofill. And then we will then see if this does what it's supposed to do. It's picking up the right one. It looks like it's picking up the right one there. So everything looks good. It made everything 0. That is what we would expect. And we're back in balance, indicated by the green zeros. So we've reallocated all the expenses, making them go down to 0, to our categories of public health, education, community service programs, management and general, and fundraising. So now we're going to take a look at the next item, which is going to be number 10. So I'm going to ungreen number 9. Number 9 is going to be ungreen. I'm going to right click on it to do so and make that no fill for ungreen. And then we're going to make green number 10. Number 10 then says that net assets released to show satisfaction of state grant requirements, that the grant resources be used for education. In other words, you'll recall up here, and this is kind of the confusing thing that we got to be aware of with the not-for-profit organization. Anytime we have the restrictions, we need to track the restrictions so that we know when to release the restriction. Here we used a grant. We got grant money specifically for education. So for education purposes, and if we look at our categorization here, with our categorization of expenses, we're saying that this 128,508 was used for education. So what we want to do then is make sure anytime we can release money from restriction, the funds from restriction, then we're going to do so. So therefore, we've used these for education. We want to release then any restricted funds with regards to the amount that has been spent that we're allocating to education. So we're going to then unrestrict, and that's going to be with the use of these items here. So the net assets released, satisfaction of purpose restriction without donor restriction, key term without. Down here, net asset released, satisfaction of restriction with donor restriction. So you could think of these, again, I would think of them as kind of like income statement accounts. They're a reallocation account, but the one without the restriction, it's the one that's going up. That's what we want it to go up. It's kind of like an income statement account. Therefore, it's going to go up with a credit. We're going to credit this one. We're going to debit this one. The one with a restriction is going down. It's kind of like an income statement account, and therefore it has income has a credit balance. We would debit it to make it go down. It's going to go out of the restricted item into the unrestricted or without restriction. And because it's an income statement account, the without restrictions going up with a credit. Okay, so it's a pretty short transaction, but if they're long accounts, and it can be a little confusing to see which way those things are going. It'll also make more sense once we make the financial statements with it and see how this allocation process happens with regards to the income statement like account, the statement of activities. Okay, so let's do the transaction. It's going to be in cell J48. We're going to say this is number 10. And once again, we are going to be debiting, because we're reducing this one, the one with donor restrictions, net assets released. And then we're going to be crediting the top one, the one without, because this one's going to be increasing, kind of like a revenue account. Now, I'm not going to format these cells. We're just going to put the numbers in right over the top of this. And so if you want to read these, you'd have to see where they are down here, because we don't want to wrap the cells or anything like that. So we're going to say the debit is going to be equal to, or the amount then, is equal to the amount that was spent for the education services. And we picked that up top. We broke them out into our education, the 128,504. Those are fulfilling the requirement, and therefore we can take it out of the restricted items. So there it is. So there's going to be our transaction. So once again, the debit is going to go to the one with restrictions. So that's in Q52. equals, and we'll scroll over to the debit, and the credit is going to go to the one without restrictions. That's in cell Q51 equals, and we're going to scroll over to pick up the credit. So there we have that. If we scroll back down, we're back in balance. We've done this reallocation process, and that's a new kind of thing for the for the governmental or for the not-for-profit types of organizations, as opposed to a for-profit organization. It could take a little bit of understanding to get used to this transaction. Once we make the financial statements again and go through the closing process, this will make more sense. That's what we'll do next time.